Hello, everyone, and welcome to the GlobalLogic Cafe LinkedIn Live Conversations. Our LinkedIn Live conversations on the GlobalLogic Cafe are going to be all about careers, technology, leadership, and diversity. We welcome our speakers for today. Our host for today's chat is Dr. Sunil Singh, Chief Technology Officer, GlobalLogic. Let's welcome Sunil with a huge round of applause.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sunil Singh, joining you all from sunny California and our headquarters in San Jose. As you heard, I'm the Chief Technology Officer of GlobalLogic. And today I am really excited. We have with us a very distinguished gentleman. I always get excited about when I have a technologist to join me. And I think today we have a technologist, a businessman and a leader, a philanthropist, a board member. So the possibilities that we can sort of question him on are endless. So let me introduce our guest today. It's Piyush Sodha. Piyush is the co-chairman and part owner of Kastle Systems, and he has had a very distinguished career leading some very prominent telecom and communication companies. He was the chairman and CEO of Cybernet, which some of you may remember was one of the largest financial settlement house for wireless operators. Before that, he led as CEO of Matrix, which provided RFID technology and was acquired by Motorola. And he's been a CEO of multiple other companies, including LCC International, which was one of the largest independent wireless engineering company in the world, and he took public. He serves on the board of the Capital Acquisition Group, MAC, and Vision Chain, and has his own philanthropy foundation. So I want to welcome Piyush. And by the way, he's also an IIT Delhi alum, and of course has an MBA from Wharton School. So Piyush, welcome to the show. I'm looking forward to an exciting conversation with you.
Sunil, a pleasure to be here. And all I can say is thank you for your very, very kind and warm introduction.
Well, so Piyush, I want to begin, I guess, like they say at the beginning. You've had, as we just went through, a really distinguished career. You led so many telecom and communication companies. And I want to focus on the one that you're leading today. If we go to your website of Castle Systems, it says smarter technology for the built environment. Can you give our audience just sort of an understanding, explain it to as a layman, exactly what is this business? And while you're doing it, it'll be great if you can put a historical context around it. Like, how did you end up in this business coming from where you are? And
Certainly. So, as just a little bit of backdrop, I was trained very early and very fortunately by many mentors who always told me to pursue opportunities or taught me to pursue opportunities that felt large because by the time you go into an opportunity, if it's small, you will dwindle it down to a very small size. If you start with something large, by the time you execute it down, it'll be managed down to something that actually you can realize some creative value creation. So just as backdrop, very quickly, as most of you will know this, so forgive me if I'm sounding too simplistic. There are 4 or 5 forms of assets in the world. There are the traditional stocks, bonds, commodities, cash, and then there's real estate. What might surprise many is real estate actually is the largest category of asset that exists in the world. And Castle singularly spends its energy serving the real estate industry. So when we imply built environment, we really are talking about the real estate industry, predominantly places like office buildings, multifamily locations where people live, and enterprises and some business and retail. Just to give a quick data point on the company today, I think we serve about approximately 2,500 buildings, predominantly in the USA. We deliver safety and access to about 2 million people that access these buildings. And we serve magnitudinally about 8,000 businesses that exist in that. My personal involvement was the company was actually founded 5 decades ago almost by a gentleman called Gene Sandberg. He retired in the 2007-8 timeframe, and that is when my partner and I entered the business to really sort of start growing it and working on it. And the vision of the company was rather straightforward. It was really to provide SaaS in those days, but SaaS, we defined it as security as a service. And the belief was that buildings needed something like that because delivering parts and platforms was too much for the building to manage, and a service wrapper was needed around it to be able to enable that. So that's been sort of the journey and how I got involved in it. So,
That's great. I mean, that's a sort of a real business lesson about how you sort of evaluate what markets to get in. And I think, that's something what Piyush just said, look for a large opportunity. I mean, that's worth its weight in gold for anyone listening. Piyush, one question I have is, I mean, you said you provide security as a service. And today, when we look at your business, there is an element of technology, and then there is, at least I see something like managed security. Do you see these as complementary? Do you see that sometimes it's conflicting? Because on the one side, you're doing technology and products. On the other side, you're saying you're providing a managed service. How do you deal with that? Why do you think that works? Or what are the things people in the audience should worry about when they're trying to do both of these things?
yeah, certainly. And it's a very fair question. Uh, I think we, the starting point for us a little bit is what is the business model that we approach the industry with? There are two categories of players in this business. One that we would say in the do it yourself category, which is a set of customers that wish to buy the parts and pieces, assemble them together, monitor and manage those technologies themselves. And then there are companies like us. In fact, I would say there are very few companies like us that sort of have this philosophy of we are the managed solution where we take the burden of security off your back. We wrap the technology with a family of services around it. Examples being who is doing your monitoring of if there's a break in, who is fixing things proactively, who is managing the different credentials for you as people are coming in and out. And we take over all of that as a service for our customers with the core belief that reproducing all those services vertically in a building is much more expensive, and thus wrapping it with services is the right way to go. What further supports the service model in our belief, and you can see I'm religious about this, is that as new technologies are emerging, we believe the easiest way for buildings to digest them is through a managed service model. Otherwise, the learning curve is so steep and the integrations are so demanding that unless you're not a very large property owner, it is very difficult to build the infrastructure yourself to be able to do that yourself. Thus, the managed service. But certainly, Sunil, it is a very fair point that at this point in time, you're managing a little bit of two agendas. You're trying to be pioneers in technology, and you're trying to be exceptional service companies. And in balancing that, you have to make certain trade-offs of what is defined as core for you and what is not defined as core. But I think my thoughts for the audience would be determining the business model, which very few people I think spend enough time on when they start businesses or do businesses. They sort of go down a certain path and they never revisit it as much as they revisit product features or marketing features and things of that nature. And I think spending the same amount of proportionate time on business model I have found in my history and my journey matters a lot. And there are many things, in fact, if as I reflect back and I think of my career, I would have done differently in different business models and most probably created a lot more value for our shareholders and our customers had I done that. I just was not mindful enough of it in my early days.
Yeah. And that's another lesson, especially, a lot of our audience is technology focused people. And so you you sort of focus on innovating the technology, and you often forget that the way to sort of, as you said, build value for shareholders, yourself, everybody, is you've got to figure out what's the best business model that supports those technologies in there. That's really good. So that's a great segue into an area that I really did want to dig in, which is technology. I mean, when we look at your portfolio of technologies, we see, intelligent video, hands-free access. Uh, while you're talking about some of these technologies, I want you to sort of give a bigger perspective to the audience on, you know, taking innovative technologies and turning them into commercially viable products. It's everybody wants to do it. It's not necessarily straightforward. Like, what in your company is, how have you built this engine of innovation that's helping you go from whatever start to end and launch a commercially viable product? And if you can put it in the context of the types of technologies you're working on, I think that would be a great lesson for the people in there.
Okay. So let me attempt in the brief time we have to see if I can paint this with some examples and some thoughts. Uh, I think if you just start with the mission that we defined ourselves in, we felt that we needed to deliver services to the building that were around safety, uh, built around being more efficient, more effective, and less intrusive for the individual as we tried to package it. So those three dimensions are what we put around ourselves. As you talked about the specific technologies, I will take a few as to give you an example. To take the example of efficiency, video technology is well recognized and understood by people. Historically, cameras are deployed, they feed into receiver devices that record them, and people use it for forensic reasons, primarily to troubleshoot if what happened, who was in a particular location, so they can pull out the footage and analyze the crime or the event that they're trying to analyze. Intelligent video essentially took these video feeds and essentially put analytics on it with the simple objective of looking for certain things in a particular camera view. So if there's a car that is parked that it shouldn't be, if somebody's loitering, facial recognition, license plate recognition, counting of people, all those applications became natural extensions that essentially attempted to make the use of the camera much more simple. Otherwise, what you had historically was a guard who was looking at a camera feed all day long on a monitor, and candidly, you get blinded by what you're looking at, and you stop registering any of the insights. So it was under the category of more efficient, far more effective, as well as easy to digest. The hands-free access is another example that we had the good fortune to innovate on. And this was around the principle for the longest time, and this is back when we entered the industry. People used plastic cards to access doors, etc. So the practical use of those cards, I think, over time we felt could easily be replaced by handheld devices like phones. And everybody carries a phone. It is more likely you will forget your wallet than you will forget your phone and the convenience of the phone. But beyond that, we wanted to take it to the next level of experience, which was allowing people to approach a door where the door automatically recognizes the phone and who you are and opens itself, rather than having to present a card and do that. And we felt by doing that, not only by doors, but elevators, et cetera, the elevator taking you to the right floor, were elements of making the experience very hands-free. So those examples were really designed to give you a sense how we took the mission and we drove it down. I think the bigger question, the tougher question you asked, Sunil, was, maybe not to paraphrase, is how do you go around innovating and doing this in so many variables of technology, which is tricky, to be honest. I think traditionally, as is pretty obvious to most, is there are two vectors. You can have a technology platform that is looking for a problem to solve. You can have a problem set that you understand well that is actually searching for requisite technologies to solve. And I believe culturally, and at least my history has been more on the latter, which is understanding the customer well, having a matrix of well understood problems, and then constantly scanning or looking for technologies. And I think that is the philosophy that we have had in sort of driving this. And then you put a process around that about you have a dedicated research team that is looking at certain things. You have senior level people that we call gatekeepers who are looking at what should be allowed into the company versus not. Otherwise, you can get disoriented with too many things. You have steering committees that look at these to make sure before you embark into it. And once you make a decision to do that, you put a lot of dedicated effort
Mhm.
around that so that you actually win and you dominate. So I think those broad philosophies are sort of what we have done in the past to get us to sort of where we are, and along the way with this framework of efficiency, effectiveness,
That's
and ease, came a framework that said look for these solutions for our building owners and their associated tenants, and what can we do to do that. But it also puts a burden on us on the service side, where we also have to become equally efficient to do this. So innovation and service delivery, etc., is an imperative as well.
Mhm.
So it's a heavy lift, but
Mhm.
we believe the model builds best value because the relationships we tether with our customers go very long.
Yeah.
And thus, our average customer most probably has a life of 15 to 20 years, as an example, which is not easy to find in this day
No,
and age.
that is.
So I think we believe that the model, and if you do it well and you serve them well, has a tendency to produce that life of
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah, well, that's another valuable lesson on innovation and how to manage the process. But I'm going to sort of see if I can put you in the spot a little bit. Have there been instances where this, you've got a framework, you've got a process, it hasn't quite worked. You end up applying it, and then you deliver a product, bring it to market, and it doesn't quite work. Does that happen?
Yeah. I'd be too embarrassed to count all the times it hasn't. So let's maybe start with that confession, Sunil. I think as I reflect on it, a few things. Uh, we often it's it's a well-known term, MVP, minimum viable product. We often approach the market with a perception of what we think is minimally viable.
Hmm.
What we often find in fast-moving technologies and competitive industries and industries that are actually fairly well funded, that pace of what MVP is getting constantly redefined. And where the mistake often sometimes has happened is you can lock into something and not be bold enough in what you're defining the MVP to be, and come out with something that actually doesn't quite hit the target. And then you're back to sort of, if you will, kept playing catch up a little bit. The second area I would have learned, maybe I was not such a believer in, but have really learned very realistically more so in the last decade than I had before, is the importance of great UX and UI in products. I think where we have not had successful launches is we have built something that is functionally rich but tedious to use. And that is a skill set that if you don't invest in carefully enough on the front end, it'll get away from you.
Yeah.
Uh, the other couple of things where I think we have stumbled is we took our eye off of talent, did not invest enough in standing it up, supporting it, rewarding it adequately. So that got away from us from time to time. You sometimes think you've achieved a certain pinnacle. And the truth is that that's when you're most vulnerable because everybody is sort of coming after you. And you must pay more attention to continued investment in talent at that point. Those are the few things that would come to mind,
Great.
Sunil, that I would say in this journey that we have, at least where I have, we have stumbled along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. In terms of technologies, we've been talking about some of the things that you brought up, and how you're applying them. Given that you're so steeped in technology, is there something out there today you're seeing sort of on the horizon, and you're saying, boy, this is going to be really transformative for our industry? Does anything come to mind that you want to talk about?
Yeah, the lens I put on it is technology second, problem set first. So as I'd shared that, Sunil. So I have that religion wired into me a little bit. So all of this for the audience, I will say, is a biased view. So please filter it for.
Well, I would add to that though, Piyush, that given that you've had so much success, it's probably a pretty good sort of bias to
Yeah.
start with.
So again, it's so everybody should not, therefore, because I'm sure there are massive platforms of innovation that'll come and do amazingly well that have different philosophies of technology looking for problems. So I don't, it's just a religion where Castle is and where I have been in my history. So when I think of technology, again, I go back to the core problem sets. Is there anything I can do to improve the work experience? So there is a technology called ultra wideband that we believe is already seeing the market, but is soon to come, which has amazing skills of being, if you will, several feet of RF technology, but with great location services capability. And we think we can do a family of things to innovate around that core technology to improve the work experience and the living experience. We believe for our customers, improvement in energy is a big agenda. And we assert ourselves between our camera technologies and other things that we can provide, and other IoT devices, that we can provide great insights into occupancy of spaces. So if you understand the use of spaces, you can most probably pivot very well into feeding that information into energy management and thus improve the
Mhm.
carbon footprint and bring the energy expenses down considerably. A very, very relevant issue for the times and what we face. I think long term, we imagine a world where these buildings are running, uh, unmanned, if you will. So addressing how these buildings operate through digital twins and other technologies is sort of central to our thought process. A little bit further out, but we're laying the, if you will, the foundation and the brickwork, so we can build on that with that
That's
mindset. So here are 2, 3 examples of just, and I could go on through
yeah,
taking that vision all the way from smart buildings to smart cities and driving that further. So there's a vision and excitement. And
yeah,
if you ask me what excites me and how I feel about the business today, I candidly feel the same way I felt when we bought the business from the original founder. It had so much potential, was a great brand and a great sort of business model, but we just saw so much upside potential. And today I almost feel as much energy, if not more, around that agenda.
yeah.
So there's just so much change coming and so many problems to solve. I think candidly, that's where the excitement comes from.
But and I think we sense that excitement, and what a vision. I mean, thinking of completely sort of self-managed smart buildings. I think you're right. AI is definitely moving in that direction, the IoT technology. So I can't wait for that future. I'm going to switch gears a little bit because, I want to make sure that we address a facet that is, at least I'm fascinated with. I think a lot of our audience would benefit from, and that's around sort of leadership. Um, you have obviously been a leader for a long time. We just rattled the names of all the companies that you've led, but how did you sort of reach there? I mean, we know you at one time you were like a lot of our audience, a student at IIT Delhi. You did your MBA at Wharton. Did you sort of chart a path out for yourself, saying, "I'm going to be the CEO," or did it just fall in your lap? Um,
Yeah, no, it's a very honest answer is I've been extremely lucky in life. One thing I will share with the audience is that and I did not have this lens back then when I was young, but I've learned it over the years. Is traditionally job searches either vector around technologies, they vector around industries, they vector around money. For me, that was a big driver since I had come from with very little money to the USA, and or they function around the function and the role that you're performing. The lens most people often forget in their younger years to apply really is the biggest thing that mattered to me was the mentors I got along the way. And I would say that's where my fortune kicked in, that in my early years and the early companies I did, I had amazing mentors who taught me great practices, thoughts, uh, work discipline, work habits that stayed very well with me. And I would say those first 10 years of luckily finding the perfect mentors actually led me to some successes, future in business, etc., as I went forward. If there was a thought I would leave with everybody is that as you look, the importance of mentorship should be very high in your consideration. Not so much the money and the experience and all will follow. I wish I had learned this, but I was fortunate that I landed in situations where the mentors were great. The other thing, happened for me was I got into the right industries. So the old saying, Sunil, that when water is rising, all boats will rise. It's true. Uh, I landed in wireless telecommunication at a point when it was just sort of hitting that point of where international countries were granting wireless licenses for people to build out mobile systems. And I had just a great journey to ride out. And as you mentioned earlier, I was able to take a company public. But really, little credit to me was really the environment and our ability to really just grow with that and be very successful in the delivery of that. And the last thing I would say that has served me well is wrapping around the customers. So I, by habit, try to spend 40 to 50% of my time with customers. I spend or try to spend 20 to 25% of my time with talent. And that means existing talent as well as new talent constantly. The rest goes into some whatever I'll call it administration overhead work. I'm not even sure what that is, but
Yeah.
where I spend most of my time, and I was taught early in that regard, and that's where I get all my knowledge. And listening to customers is over the years has become a bit of an art. What they say isn't always necessarily what they need. So being able to dissect that and understand that deeply comes by spending time with them. It's very difficult to walk in and imagine you understand the problem very well until you do it for a little bit of time.
Yeah. Well, a valuable set of lessons again in there of how one. I want some personal experience for our audience. Any time that you really felt your leadership was tested or you had some self-doubt, uh, is there anything you can share with? I'm sure it hasn't been a perfectly smooth
Yeah,
ride.
yeah, no, not at all. It's a very, very reasonable question, Sunil. It's self doubt, honestly, always exists. Otherwise, you're not being smart enough about listening to people. You must always exist in a mode of questioning even your instincts and your decisions because you will not always be right, but be bold when you make the decision. I would say that the biggest issue that came recently to mind was COVID. It's a thing that has affected every business fundamentally. And for us, like most businesses, our initial thought when it happened was, oh my God, let us be defensive. Let us go see where we need to cut costs, see what our customers are going to do, how do we manage, et cetera, et cetera. But candidly, very quickly into that journey, we realized this is most probably one of our biggest opportunities as a company. So what we realized was that people are going to have a hard time coming back to work. And what could we do that for? What could we do for our customers and their tenants to make this a more easy decision to make as they come to work? And in that, we came up with themes of defining what safe spaces are, how to do environmental testing in that, how to do COVID testing and integrate that data, how to test for occupancy along the way. And those family of new services actually made the COVID era for us the fastest growth era during Castle's history. So what became a moment of doubt and failure, actually, we were able to adapt pretty well. So the lesson learned for me is, don't always be very defensive in the posture. Always think big and lean into opportunities because they are there. It's just about adapting and redefining.
That's a great. I know there's lots of other things. I do have one area that before I start looking at some of the questions that are coming in, and that has to do with all these new technologies that we hear about. And the famous saying goes, there's the leading edge and the bleeding edge. And I know in my role as chief technology officer, I'm sort of always debating and looking at, and there's this question of, are you catching a technology? A friend of mine always likes to say, it's like surfing. You're a little too early, you're going to get wiped out. You're a little too late, and there's nothing left for you to ride. So we look. I'm just going to throw a few technologies out, and as briefly as you can, tell me, do you think it's going to lead somewhere, or you don't think it It really is. I'm going to start with something that may be relevant for your business, the metaverse.
So, no, boy, you picked one that I most probably know the least about. Uh, you know, just to be consistent with what I said earlier, I think I look for things that are, uh, I would say, sometimes most probably a little late in the maturity, but I look for them really at the high point, ideally, but also on the other side when they've actually come out of maturity. So a metaverse would be something I would read about, but I would just watch it with intrigue more than anything. To be
Yeah,
candid, in Castle's agenda we have so many. I call them near field
yeah,
opportunities with existing mature platforms ranging from AI, IoT, UWB,
yeah,
etc. I and maybe in that I will miss something big, but I most probably read it with interest, but I
yeah,
would be hard pressed to give you a view on that or a thumbs down, thumbs up. It's
yeah,
many smart people are pursuing it, so there must be to something to it. I also didn't go up in gaming or anything, so
yeah,
candidly, Sunil, I don't even have a good
yeah.
appreciation
I
for it.
mean, there's it, get listening to your focus on solving problem. It's interesting because the question that comes to my mind is you're obviously all about securing physical buildings and making sure the in some ways you're doing sort of identity management because you're really identifying. And the question is, in the metaverse, would you end up doing sort of digital identity management, and will the two merge? And but honestly, I don't know the answers to those either. These are all
Yeah,
interesting.
over time we have imagined a world where we believe that the physical and cyber access had sort of a real parallel to them, and there was a very large opportunity to it. Our practice in the business for 14 years has not demonstrated that.
Yeah.
So you catch me at a pause on something like that, where instinctively it makes a lot of sense. In practice, we have not been able to
Just
reliably roll
capitalize.
that out or drive that. Yeah.
Yeah.
The problems our customers struggle with is really best work experience, safety, improving on the efficiency of the building and how it's running. Uh, those become more the or how to improve the living conditions in a multifamily environment. Those become the dominating variables today
Yeah.
through apps and other things, rather than a metaverse would maybe for us go a little too far at this
Yeah.
juncture.
Yeah. Well, I'll go to some of the questions that are coming in from the audience. Here's an interesting one. Um, I guess I'm trying to paraphrase. I'll paraphrase that a little bit. I think the question is asking, how do you maintain sort of a balance between professional life and personal life? And I think the part two of that question is really what is sort of the advice on, in the new work from home culture, what would you advise, I guess, people on, how should they manage it for themselves?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have half the audience hang up after I give this answer, but I will attempt it at this point in time. Uh, so I'll take the second question first, Sunil. I believe, and especially for the more let me just say younger audience on the call, I learned so much, and I'm old school as you can see, uh, by being in the presence of people. I learned about the companies, I learned about the customers, I learned their moment of mentorship, the moment of innovation. What I learned at the coffee machine made a whole world of difference to me. So I gravitate on, unfortunately, in the camp of one should be at work 2 to 3 days a week, at least physically, rather than do everything remote. I worry about people who go 100% remote because I think it creates a real sense of lack of association, candidly, lack of growth. And I think the businesses, at least that I talk to, and the leaders I talk to today, believe that their companies are not operating as efficiently uh, as they should, because they're now starting to see cracks in the innovation agenda, the onboarding agenda, the growth of talent agenda, which then will create pretty significant issues for them downstream. So I come into this with a bit of a bias towards encouraging people to go back in 2 to 3 days,
Hmm.
despite how bad the commute and everything else will feel in that journey.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we've sort of struggled with the same thing, and I can tell you that there are certain instances or types of problem solving that we think lend themselves much more naturally to a physical presence among, and creative problem solving is a perfect example. It's very hard to do it when you're all remote. When you're if you have a very well defined task that you're doing, it's easier. But when you're sort of, it's unstructured and there are ideas that are flowing in, we've all always felt that it helps to have people in a room together and working on it. So I
Yeah.
think there's some consistency with what I'm
And on
hearing.
the, yeah, and very briefly on the personal life thing, it's really about discipline. As a habit, unless there's always a moment or two, but I make weekends very sacred for me. So they're family time, they're personal time, and I try to do everything I can in my control to not let that violate. And in the weekdays, I work 10 to 12 hours. That's just what life is for
Yeah.
me, and it has served me well. I don't have kids at home, so I'm a little fortunate. They've all grown and moved on, so I'm a little bit lucky in that regard. Uh, so I make it a point as much as possible to be home for dinner every night as much as possible. That's where I find myself.
That's excellent. I mean, another lesson that really people could use more frequently. Um, Here's another one that I think may be a little, challenging for all of us who are in the technology business, and it's very specific that we are hearing a lot of benefits of how technology is helping change the industry. What about some of the disadvantages of technologies? Do you see them, and what do you think about that? And there. Okay.
Yeah, we as I had shared, at least, and I'll take my Castle perspective. It's maybe I should take a broader perspective that I we approach our customers with a managed service mindset. So there's an element of the service that the technology is enabling at the end of the day. So for us, the need to serve, the need for high touch, the need of awareness of what's exactly going on as a service is very, very high. And we therefore don't pass the problem on to just a technology solution, but wrap it around the service to do that. We think there's an element of touch that could be lost in that journey, but that's just the philosophy the company has had for 5 decades now. So Neil, that's all I would say in that regard. There are many more wiser people who could most probably address this. I
Yeah.
would most probably need a deeper dive into all the other implications of that.
Yeah. I think this one, and I think this may be more relevant for maybe sort of India or things like that, because it talks about that. We heard you talk about smart cities. Uh, why not focus on smart villages? I'm not quite sure how to define a village, but maybe the question here being asked is there a role for some of these technologies in the less advanced, you know, areas? And what is your thought? What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So predominance of our business as Castle attempts to serve traditional commercial buildings and multifamily high rises, which are classically found more in urban areas. I'll just use that word. Uh, Out more in the non-urban areas, those structures traditionally don't exist. The concept of being able to provide services across the community is still a very relevant one, I believe. And the real magic of this comes at the intersection of having somebody's experience in a city be uniform through one set of identity. So the underlying principle of a smart city is enabling a host of different privileges and services for an individual based on their identity. That's the simple concept. And using that information to better manage the city, whether it's transportation or energy or services that need to be provided. I believe a micro version of that could be done in the non-urban areas. I just haven't candidly thought that much about it because all our customers keep us consumed in the very busy urban areas. But I'm sure there's a thought around that, that if one dived deeper, one could think of what could be done there.
Yeah, that's great. I think there's one final one I want to ask, and I'm conscious of the time. It seems like a very sort of general life philosophy, but
Oh
given
God,
the
I'm going to fail this for sure.
no, I don't think so. But you've given some real pearls of wisdom. It comes said we millennials, so I assume it's from somebody who's a millennial. What is what are three things? It doesn't have to be three; it can be one. You would tell us to focus on early in order to have, and I want to be careful that it's not saying professional. It says in order to have a happier life. Um, Thoughts on that?
Look, I I believe family and having that established and a happy place and having an association with that is imperative. I have found great joy in that. I found great growth in that. Uh, God, my wife would tell you I've grown a lot because of her. But in all sincerity, I believe that is an element that I would say is a nucleus that is very important. Wrapping around that, I would say is a community of mentors that can help you grow to your potential. I think not wrapping good mentors around you, you will do yourself a disservice because you will learn lessons that you wish you had learned a lot earlier, and then you will reflect back and wonder why and what happened. And then lastly, I also personally have enjoyed a association of family and friends outside of my core nucleus family. And I would say that would be something that is important. If you ask me, you know, what to do professionally, I would just say two things that will give you some joy later on. One is to involve yourself in ideas and things that are big, uh, and always force yourself to think big. That doesn't mean necessarily take massive risk. I maybe am not of that opinion. I am of the opinion that the thoughts you have should be something big because that gives you a sense of impact and gives you a sense of what you're doing. And lastly, whatever you do, try to be impactful and learn deeply in that moment because that'll also give you a sense of satisfaction and something you will learn long term. Off the top, Sunil, those are thoughts
Oh,
that.
that's fantastic. I think you passed that with flying colors in there. I mean, those are just lessons that I think everyone can use. So with that, I think we come to the end of our session. We are out of time. Piyush, I want to really thank you for taking the time. I know that some of the things you talked about, I mean, they're just incredible lessons on management, on innovation, on professional growth, on personal life. And I hope our audience really enjoyed that and learned from it. So thank you again, and I really look forward to being in touch again.
It has been a pleasure, and truly thank you for the opportunity, and truly, it's been a lot of fun this morning. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll come back with something next time.